My name is Hugo. I'm just a developer, as most of the people here. And I've been working with Cloudflare Workers for, I will say, a year. Before I did AWS Lambda, and then I moved to OpenWhisk, which is now IBM Functions. And I got introduced to IBM OpenWhisk in Pixels Camp. There was someone, informal talk, someone said, oh, you use Lambda, why not try IBM? And then in London, someone said, okay, try Cloudflare Workers. And I tried Cloudflare Workers. Some people will say it's a limited solution. It's not so broad as AWS or IBM OpenWhisk or Azure Function. Never tried Azure Functions. But, so I will give you, I try to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of Cloudflare Workers. But in my view, I like to work with a problem usually, and then from then grow and see if we can actually overtake that problem and it becomes a really nice solution. So, anyone knows Cloudflare? Okay. So by request, they move every day 10% of internet traffic, not by load, bandwidth. Bandwidth will be possibly Netflix or something, or AWS, for example. But by request, they do 10% of internet requests. They also offer the 111 DNS Resolver. If you don't use it, use it. In Lisbon, the response time is like 4 milliseconds. Usually in Europe is 11, 12. But in Lisbon, it's quite fast, reliable, and, trustworthy. Before I used actually 888 from Google. So Cloudflare Workers, let's say it's serverless. It's not serverless. Everybody talks about serverless, but let's say it's your code deployed in the cloud globally. An introduction to Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a layer that you put in front of your website, usually via DNS. And with that, you can actually avoid attacks or optimize your scripts and so on. So the edge, Cloudflare at the moment, as of last week, I think was 165 data centers, if not 166. It's always growing. I think they now are batching, like in a week we announced 10 or 5 altogether, not one at a time. Before they announced one by one. But 2 years ago, they gave us the opportunity to use their data centers, program the code, your code, and put in front of your website. Let's say it's a service worker, but that runs on the edge. So if you use service workers, the code is almost the same, and the APIs are almost the same. So they use, to sort this problem, they've been looking at several solutions, and one of them came out was to use the V8 engine as everyone else uses. If you use Chrome, the V8 engine is in your computer, and they used the solution. They thought they thought workers as browser tabs, as isolates. So this system is based on Service Workers API. Each code you do, it's sandbox, so it doesn't interfere to the clients next to you or other clients of Cloudflare. And the way they do it is when you push code, it goes, let's say it's broadcasted to all the data centers, and in less than 30 seconds, you will get your code not deployed, but let's say the code is there. Then when someone calls your function, your worker, they will run and they will stay in a dormant way. This is a solution Cloudflare came across, and that's why they have very low cold starts. So cold starts with Cloudflare is something like 5 milliseconds. With other companies, I will show you, it's more than that. So a traditional serverless solution, you have like a container and then your code. And that's, as you can see, the overhead is quite big. With Cloudflare, they looked at the browser and they sandboxed the whole solution in a way that the overhead is the same, and then each instance, if you call it, has like 3 megabytes, no more than of memory. So it's quite small and runs very quickly. From a cold start, this is a benchmark online. You can all check it out. From a cold start, Cloudflare comes out at 57 milliseconds, which is quite quick. Some people, if you look on Twitter, some people joke and say they are cheating because once you push your code to the edge and there is a first request, there will never be a cold start ever again, because usually instances or isolates stay alive for 7 days. If they need to purge, to kill the instance, they will kill it, but mostly if they keep running, they will stay alive 7 days. The benefits of workers is basically, it's far cheaper than AWS or IBM. A low memory footprint, very low, and the cold starts are really quick. The cold starts or the run, the code is so quick that you need to do it in a way that's imperceptible to the user. Of course, there are, depends how you type your code, let's say, and how you think of your code. The limitations are interesting, is that you can't actually program more. Your code, the whole code, cannot be more than 1 megabyte. And some of you might say, oh, so big? So big? No, it's actually so small. It's true, but I see this as an advantage, because sometimes if you have a limit like this, you will not do the mistake of putting lots of libraries in your code, in your JavaScript code. And so you will think more clearly. You will say, oh, I have a problem, I have to think of a solution, but I can't actually import lots of libraries to do it. My memory per each worker in each data center is 128 megabytes. It's not a lot, but still it has a lot of power. Infinite scalability, of course, everybody will tell you, but I usually say it's the limit of the infrastructure of Cloudflare. It's a bit like Amazon saying infinite scalability. Yes, it's their limit. And there is the way the billing works with Cloudflare is that if you have a free plan, you still pay for the workers. You pay $5 for 10 million workers, 10 million requests. But then you have like a tier plan. So if you are in a free plan, you are allowed to run your worker for 5 milliseconds CPU time. It's important to understand that CPU time is not a fetch time, let's say. It's not a request time. You can actually run your request far more than 5 milliseconds. So let's say you do some math calculation. That for sure has to be 5 milliseconds. But then if you fetch an image from a different website, that can stay open, that connection can stay open as long as your client doesn't hang up. So you are not limited. They are only calculating CPU time. Personally, I use a Pro plan because it gives you 10 milliseconds is a good option. I don't go business or enterprise. Most of the cases I use. Some people came across with the cryptography issues. They say it's 10 milliseconds is too short for cryptography. If you use the Web Crypto API, which is actually you can use on your workers, that's not a problem. It can actually run faster than 10 milliseconds. Data storage. People think, okay, you have your code, so how do you store your data? You have several options, but one of them is in your code itself. You can do that. You can use global variables on your code, and I will show you examples further ahead. You can build your own cache API if you have let's say, CouchDB or other database solution. You can actually spread around the globe your servers and then call the functions, call requests there. A new thing they had on Wednesday, and it was beta, was Cloudflare Workers key value storage, so the KV. It's no longer beta. I have it there, so there were some limitations to use it. Now it's no longer beta. Or then you can use an external API like Firestore or other provider. I think Azure has as well. These are the limitations. One of the limitations that was gone since KV moved out of beta was the billion key limit storage you had. So now, if this is right, because this is, if you go online, the documentation still says beta, but we got an email saying it's no longer that, it's different. So you can have 10 namespaces, 20 namespaces. Your keys, let's say the bit of the key, it's 512 bytes. And then your values can be 64 kilobytes. In some cases, we actually use 2 keys to sort out problems when the files are bigger. There is only a caveat here, which is you can't write to a key quicker than one second every time. So if you want something quicker, more atomic, that's not an option. You have to think differently. You could actually circumvent this and write a lot of data to a global variable on your code, store it there momentarily, and then every second write the key back to the KV. A good thing they announce as well is expiring keys. So it's very good for token handling. Before you had actually to, your value had to have a way to say when the key expires. Now it's actually embedded in the API. It's a bit like Redis. You just say TTL is 1 minute or 2 minutes, and the key will expire. The great thing here is, for me, is if you build Cloudflare Workers, you should think geoagnostically, meaning you develop your solution and forget there is Lisbon or there is London or whatever. But for that, you actually have to run everything on yourself, let's say, on your code. Because if an example we give, if you're doing a payment, you're processing payments in Portugal with SIBs. If you need to connect your API and your user is in Singapore, still you will have huge latency here. So you need to think how to do this kind of originless solution. And for that, it's interesting because your code moves to the edge in less than 30 seconds. But it's sometimes very hard to really believe in GeoAgnostic because it's hard. I mean, it's a new level of user. You don't know where your user is coming from. So how to get starting? The most important thing is you actually go to developers.cloudflare.com, and you have plenty of documentation. It's quite simple. They have as well cloudflareworkers.com, which is a small sandbox where you can play, paste your code, play it around, seeing how it works. Because it's open to the public, some calls on the API are limited to avoid, I mean, people doing naughty stuff. You see people testing their code here, and then when they go to the community, they will complain, it's not working, it's working. But in fact, it's because the one API is different from the other. It's a defense mechanism. If you haven't done this, there is this, I think PixelScamp did it already. They have a website, they might launch it 1st of April. It's kind of a tradition. It's workers.dev. And so you can go there and claim your subdomain, I think either pixels.workers.dev they claimed, or PixelScamp, I'm not sure. But you can go there, claim it, it's for free for now. So, and then you can start working. This is a new solution. They want to make it easier for everyone to play, so you can reserve your subdomain. Ways to deploy. You have the boring dashboard solution where you go, click Launch Editor, paste code, which is not the best. Personally, I use Terraform. Other people use serverless, and they automate with GitHub. So it's a easy solution to do it. And I usually say in code, I mean, not just me, is it's your imagination. Your limit will be your imagination. So these are some use cases. Some cases, easy cases to use Cloudflare Workers. A/B testing. Blue-green releases will be one of them. Static web hosting, I have some examples to show you. Country blocking, rate limiting. TLS version blocking, it's a very nice one because sometimes you go to a website and it says you don't have the proper TLS version on your browser. And users, because their knowledge of technology varies a lot, they don't know what's going on. They say there is an error on a website. So you can actually, with the worker, say before the validation, before they enter to your website with your worker, they can actually say, your TLS version is too low, please upgrade. Instead of throwing an error saying the normal Chrome version of saying it doesn't work, it's a good way. This was interesting. I think 6 months ago, I recommended someone called Cloudflare to do this because I was seeing complaints from users, and you can actually do it yourself. So it's not a problem. Course pre-flight, it's really important. Browsers sometimes do naughty requests, so you can actually manipulate the answers before. Payment processing, it's a good one. One of the companies I own, we use Stripe to handle payments, and everything is done in the worker because it's tokens. Even problems with idempotency, Stripe handles that, so it's not a problem. And now with expiring keys, what we do is we say to the customer, it's a bit like SIBs with MBWay. We give a token to the client, say, come and pay something, and he has only 60 minutes. If he doesn't pay, it expires the key. When he goes there, it says, oh, sorry, payment is gone. So it's an easy one. Cache is very powerful, but one interesting one to see, GeoAgnostic, is asset tracking. It's a beacon from Estimote, it's a Polish company, and this can be globally deployed. They have a LTM modem inside. You put on your asset. An example could be a container ship or a container in a truck. It's actually, I think it will cover 120 countries in the world. Not all the countries in the world have LTEM. And so what happens is this device, as it's traveling around the world, before, if you didn't use workers, you need to connect to a specific zone. You can actually program to say different zones, but it's very complicated. So if you say to the device, connect to a worker, and with any cost, Cloudflare will actually connect. Let's say the container is in Singapore, your device will connect to Singapore. It will not connect to New York or London or Chicago. So this guarantees that the device as well will spend very little battery by running this call. So imagine if you can do something in 5 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds as opposite to 1 second. Because if you are in somewhere remote in the globe, it's a problem. One of the next things I think Cloudflare is investing is in Africa, because it's actually the area where it's less data center populated, let's say. Some demonstration of code. I don't know if you can see it well, but I will try. This is the most basic worker you can do. This is like the serverless, not serverless, the service workers API. So you basically do a fetch, and there is a response. Simple as it is. This is an example of a static website. So you have a domain name like a blog, or if you use Hugo, we actually use for a blog this. And so you put everything static, in this case in DigitalOcean spaces, and then you use the service worker in front to connect, and so it will help you, I mean, hiding where you get the source. This is an example of a basic cache. So it does more or less the same. If you stitch the code together, you can see in the top, it checks us. It's actually a very short cache. It's 15 minutes. But it's very good for one of the clients that uses this is a sport event. And it's a bit like they have like 3,000 athletes. And when enrollment starts for the event, in an hour, they can get the 3,000 athletes. So you, at 7 p.m. in a given day, you will get a huge peak. So the first guy that goes there gets cached. And then, if there is cache, return the cache. Otherwise, do a fetch to your origin and so on. This is a very basic example. This is an interesting one for country blocking. Okay, this is just an example of countries. We had to do it like this. It's a nice countries otherwise. But if you have, you can either do this in the firewall of Cloudflare or you can hard code it yourself. So this is a cleaner way of doing it. I'm just showing you small workers, but you can stitch it quite well. I mean, we have huge, I mean, not huge, but we have things like our 2,000 lines, so it's not a problem. This is the TLS blocking that I was talking about, and it's quite simple. You can see here that what we say is, if you have 1.2 and 1.3, you are fine. If you don't, there is an error. In this case, that's the solution. We still have people using 1.0. We see that. If you search the community, it's interesting because people complain all the time. They think it's working. Let's say TLS 1.0 is that people are allowed to use your website, but they are not. They are using some tool on the internet. And usually I say to them, try with the curl to see if it works out. Debugging. What Cloudflare Workers allows you to do is, once you run your code, let's say, you can return data to your client, but still your code keeps running. So an example here, it's a very short example of logging, is that we store, in this case, this is a case for you to understand when a worker is born. So every time a worker is born, we create a global variable, worker's inception, and a worker ID. This is very good for debugging. And then runs your code. If someone next comes and calls this call again, this request, some other user in the same data center, you will have on your logging the worker inception and the worker ID. This is a very simple one. This is for Portugal. If you can see workers as a way to hide your JavaScript. Instead of scrambling your JavaScript, you can actually hide it behind a data center. And this is a very simple V8 validation. Another one here, image manipulation, because workers you can use WebAssembly. What we do here on this code is you look for get parameters on a request, and then you, let's say, crop your image, reduce your image, change the quality. This is a very recent release and uses. Another thing is use GeoAgnostic bots. So if you have a bot, you, instead of calling a specific API, and you can see this is with WhatsApp API, is that users in the US will call to a data center in the US, and users in Europe will call to data centers in Frankfurt. So if you think geoagnostically, and you run a lot of code on the data center specifically, you don't need to to have the hard thought of spreading everything out. I will just show you a quick way of pushing the code. So this is an example of code, and this is a logging mechanism. So I say to log every 50 requests. And to do it, you can use Webpack. So you can actually say yarn run build. And it will actually compact your code, let's say. And then you can Terraform apply. And this is quite quick. So in this case, I didn't change anything. So it didn't work, didn't go as planned. But I show you one of the things with Cloudflare, if you are familiar with Terraform, is if you do Terraform apply, you not just can configure the workers. You can configure your DNS configuration, all the services that Cloudflare provides. It's also Terraform. In this case, every time we change code, we check all the DNS configuration and so on. For logging, this is the website, workers.dev, if you want to check it out and reserve your subdomain. I don't know what pricing will be, but you can do it. This is the dashboard that you can play around, and there is a good tool here for sharing. So if you have a problem with your script, you can actually then go to Cloudflare community and paste the URL that comes out of here, and but don't expose your secrets. One thing we do with workers here, for example, is quick manipulation of images, where basically by changing, this is the same image, but basically by changing the URL, you can actually generate different images. What happens here is that they are the first run in a data center. They will process it, and then it stores in cache. But this is something you have to code yourself. So that's why, there is infinite possibility with the code. Another thing we do here is I can show you an example of the logging. So let's go to a random user. And this is using log DNA. So you have your worker, and at the end it says a function, so log to log DNA. And this is a lot of information Cloudflare gives you on your user. So you can see the TLS cipher it's using, TLS version. There is a nice tool here called Client Trust Score, which is very good for detecting if users are naughty or not. So you can, bots usually get a very low trust score. The worker ID I told you is that every time you push the code and that worker is run, if you search, you can see that your instance was live, and I think here for 14 hours. So you can actually see that this instance was alive for 14 hours. It didn't kill the process, and it's still live. And you can see as well which data centers and the origin. Cloudflare uses Anycast to speed up, to get your data center close to you, but not all the time you get the data center close to you. Huge amount of factors. You can have problems with peering, you can have a peak of traffic. So sometimes if you are in Lisbon, you go to Lisbon, but sometimes you go to Heathrow or Amsterdam or Madrid, Barcelona. I was seeing this week people getting Barcelona, so it's quite quick. If you build workers, build your own logging, because it's important for you to be aware if it's working out for you or not. So don't just trust Cloudflare on everything they do, but it's important. Sometimes you think it's your mistake, but sometimes it's not your mistake. You can see here origin response time. For example, here, this was a miss, so it was 385 milliseconds. If it was a hit from cache, it's usually very quick, so it was 9 milliseconds. Going back to questions. Any questions? No questions? No? No one? Anyone wants to? Anyone interested in building workers? Or not entirely? No. I'm setting up a website called Workers Recipes to help out people trying to build some workers, because I think it's a good technology and it's going in a good future. Possibly I want more people to use it so it doesn't go forgotten, let's say. People stop using it. But thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy Pixels Camp. And I'm here to answer any questions you have about workers. So, good. Good?